Since Emily Dickinson didn't travel very far, we're reading Thoreau because he at least went farther. Emily went only to Boston and not very far at all. Remember she had a trip to Washington, D.C.? But it was very little travel. Thoreau traveled more, and since you like French, right? Since you speak French, we're going to continue his trip in France. So not France, in Canada. Page 299. French Canada. By October 1st, they were back in Quebec. But Thoreau was coming down with a cold. So they cut their trip short and booked passage back to Montreal. They rambled through the upper town while they waited, visiting the memorial to Wolfe and Montcalm and counting cannon. 24 32-pounders arrayed against American invaders. Thoreau inspired mapped gates and noted positions as if he were a secret reconnaissance mission. He was on a reconnaissance mission back at the market stalls in the city below. He bargained for cake and fruit and searched for souvenirs that weren't imported from elsewhere. To his disgust, even the genuine Canada crook-neck squash seeds were from Boston. With an hour or so to kill before the steamer raised anchor, he dashed back to the restaurant and stood on their mahogany table to copy the great map of Canada on their wall. That night, Thoreau nursed his cold in a berth on the steamer. Back in Montreal, he felt well enough to climb the city's namesake Mount Royal, following in the footsteps of Jacques Cartier himself, who had climbed it in 1535. See, he's like a historical tourist. 1535, nearly 100 years before the English set foot on Plymouth Rock. See, they were close to 100 years earlier, where Cartier had looked down upon an, quote, an Indian town in the interior of a new world. Thoreau looked down upon, quote, a splendid and bustling stone-built city of white men, with only a few, quote, squalid, unquote, Indians left to sell them baskets. Late that afternoon, they rejoined their boisterous Yankee countrymen. For a night and a day, they retraced their steps by railroad and steamer, reaching Concord on the evening of October 3rd. They had been gone exactly a week and 2 days. That's a short trip there. A week and 2 days. Traveled 1,100 miles and spent in Thoreau's case $12.75, including $1.12 for 2 guidebooks and a map. You think we could go for a week and 2 days? Had he seen Canada? Hardly. He knew it, but he had learned something. Quote, the Canada which I saw was not merely a place for railroads to terminate in and for criminals to run to. Thoreau longed to see more, and he signed off from, quote, a Yankee in Canada, the travel essay he eventually published, with his hope for, quote, a longer excursion on foot through the wilder parts of Canada. For a while writing up the excursion, Thoreau began to envision something wider and deeper than a mere traveler's tale. He plunged into a new course of research, sketching a kind of sweeping cosmopolitan longue durée history, a 7-mile panorama of greater New England. Conceived across deep time and planetary space, Canada had shown him puzzles to unriddle. What accounted for the contrast between familiar New England and alien Why had the French been explorers while the English were settlers? Why had the French joined with the Indians and become so much like them, while the English and Americans cut themselves off from the Indians and destroyed them? How had the lands, rivers, and mountains shaped the lifeways of nations? And how had those nations, English, French, and Indian, shaped the lands they lived on? Thoreau's notes and observations convinced him that the great era of New World exploration, settlement, and industrialization had produced a historical shift to the modern world. He knew he was a child of this world, even as he seemed born to stand outside of it and resist it. Perhaps with his learning, energy, and deep gift for languages, he could understand the causes of the changes happening around him. Is that his gift, you think? He could deep understand the causes. You're the one who seeks for the cause of everything. Do you know the cause of virtually everything? His grand and unifying vision pointed to that deeper, wider reality he called the, quote, the framework of the universe, unquote. When one surveys the dozens of research notebooks, scores of meticulous journal volumes, the maps and surveys, and thousands of pages of natural history notes and unpublished manuscripts, one begins to comprehend the scope of his vision. But to see the full picture, one must also examine the hundreds of books he notated and the hundreds of charts and graphs where he pooled and organized his growing data. It was a staggering, ambitious vision, impossible, really, but Thoreau embarked on it with ferocious energy. God, would you work that hard on research? No. You would need hundreds of books. Nearly all of this activity dates from 1850. Out of this vast front, particular nodes crystallized into a series of books and projects. Quote, Cape Cod, and, quote, the Maine Woods, unquote, taken together, explore the two ultimate poles of wilderness, ocean and mountain, and the rivers that connect them. The third node took shape in the Indian books. Thoreau's attempt to document indigenous alternatives to European narratives of social and economic life. Connecting them all was natural history and the basic environmental frame on which he could weave his portraits of social and historical change, rather than as the Concord and Merrimack rivers had given in a week. A unifying natural baseline, the thread for his golden ingots of study and reflection. Had Thoreau lived long enough to make that western journey through the wilds of Canada, it would be easier to see how his brief excursion to Canada fit, even precipitated, his larger vision. Greeley admonished him to publish the Canada trip while it was still fresh, but to Greeley's annoyance, Thoreau plunged into his ambitious research project instead, using his new library privileges to check out stacks of history books and copy reams of information into his new Canada notebook. My God, he's got a curious mind. So he likes hiking and books. But how can you hike with all those books? Instead of working up the Canada journey for the lecture season of 1850 to 51, he made do with the updated Cape Cod. Not until the 1851-52 season loomed with its demand for an absolutely new lecture did he turn to the Canada material, premiering Excursion to Canada at the Lincoln Lyceum at December 30th, 1851, well over a year after their return. He repeated and conquered into parts on January 7th and March 17th, 1852. By then he knew the whole mess was a failure of mere potboiler. Don't expect too much, he warned his audience, for he visited Canada only as the bullet visits the wall at which it is fired, and from which it rebounds as quickly and flattened. It's hard to visit in 1 week. It's like being a tourist. Do you think it takes a month or two?
No, it takes a couple of years.
A couple of years is better. For being forced to travel so fast, he had little to say. What I got from going to Canada was a cold. Basically, you just get a cold. If you travel too fast, you just catch a cold.
He got there at the wrong time, October.
He might have shelved the whole thing, but again, desperate for money, he shipped it to Greeley. It looks unmanageable, Greeley groaned. Too long. Let's face it, outdated. By then, plenty of others had traveled to Canada and published too. After a discouraging run of rejections, Greeley placed it in with the new Putnam's Monthly, whose editor, George Curtis, had helped Thoreau raise his Walden house. Curtis broke Thoreau's unmanageable narrative and excursion to Canada into 5 parts, starting with the magazine's inaugural issue of January 1853. Trouble flared immediately. Curtis, though an old friend, knew enough not to publish heresy. He deleted Thoreau's ironic and absurdly offensive sentences about Montreal's Cathedral of Notre Dame. I'm not sure about this Catholic religion would be an admirable one if the priest were quite omitted. I think that I might go to church myself sometimes. Some Monday, if I lived in a city where there was such a one to go to. He's like Emerson, he likes a silent prayer in the church. He prefers no service. He'll go only when the priest isn't there. When Thoreau discovered the Voltaireization, his fury almost ended their friendship.
They were very monarchical, Back then they were very authoritarian.
The priest.
Yeah, they scare you to death.
They scare you. Well, that's why they have Protestantism. They were too scary. Too much work, too. They wanted all your money. A distraught Greeley begged Thoreau to calm down. Don't you see, he reasoned, that since Putnam's conceals the names of its authors, the elimination of very frequent heresies like your defiant pantheism becomes a necessity. No, Thoreau did not see. The quarrel continued, and Putnam pulled the series after the 3rd installment because, as Thoreau fulminated to Blake, the editor, Curtis requires the liberty to omit the heresies without consulting me, a privilege California is not rich enough to bid for. End of section. We read 302 with Thoreau's trip to Canada.